The 2024 NFL Draft was loaded with wide receiver talent, and from the first round all the way to the 7th round, a team could find a player that can have a huge impact in 2024. Somehow, despite being one of the best players in ACC football history, being a first-team All-American, and leading the country in catches, Malik Washington found himself going all the way to the 6th round. Despite the Dolphins already having a loaded wide receiver core, they decided to draft Washington, and many believe he was the wide receiver steal of this year's draft class. As I said, he literally led the country in receptions and has become one of the best receivers in conference history, despite playing for a team that was awful and had terrible quarterback play. In today's video, I'm going to introduce you to Malik Washington. We're going to go through his upbringing, his time at both Northwestern and Virginia, his record-setting season, and why he could be an absolute steal for the Dolphins. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Malik Washington. In order to understand how Washington got to this point, we first need to go back in time. Malik grew up in the state of Georgia, and he was always a big-time athlete who grew up in a culture that was in love with the game of football. Malik always loved sports, especially football, and modeled his game after one NFL great, Steve Smith. Apparently, he caught wind of him when he was just 8 years old, and from then on, he absolutely loved him. This was all the way back in 2008, and he decided he would model his game after him. Washington's play style was like this. He played tough, smart, and with strong hands, and a strong attitude that every football player needs. He thought that no one would be able to bring him down, and Steve Smith was just an icon to him. Eventually, it would translate, as when he arrived at Parkview High School in Georgia, he would blow up as a sophomore. At only 5'9", he ended up playing a couple of positions, throwing for 106 yards and 3 touchdowns, catching 41 passes for 649 yards and 4 touchdowns, and also running for 369 yards and another touchdown. That wasn't it though, as he also played defense, and he recorded 45 tackles with 5 interceptions and 7 pass breakups. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, he also returned punts. Washington was an extremely versatile player, as he played corner, safety, slot receiver, quarterback, and special teams. Because of this, scouts would eventually take notice, as he was a Swiss Army knife type of player. In 2017, the first school that would offer Washington was Auburn, and then Cincinnati would offer a couple months in November. According to his huddle tape, he logged nearly 1,500 all-purpose yards in 2018 and had a total of 14 touchdowns as a senior. Eventually, a lot of schools took notice. Kansas State, Auburn, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, Florida State, Georgia, Bama, South Carolina, and Georgia Tech all eventually expressed interest in Malik, but the problem was they didn't know where to play him. Some recruited him as a receiver, and some recruited him as a safety. Because of this, everything was up in the air in pretty much every way, and in terms of his recruitment, Washington said, quote, "My top schools are forever changing. Because of that, I can't say who my top schools are. I'll try to get an official visit scheduled to Northwestern, and right now they're one of my top 3 schools before I make a decision." So where would Malik Washington end up going? Well, he said that Northwestern remained high on his list as he sorted through nearly 24 offers. Eventually, he decided to choose the Northwestern Wildcats over the likes of Michigan State and Tennessee. Why? Well, he wanted to play wide receiver instead of defense, and for a little bit, he actually didn't have much interest in Northwestern because they didn't really have many slots open. Eventually, a receiver by the name of Charlie Fesser decided to transfer away, and this opened up a slot for Washington, and he chose to take it. It also did seem that academics and immediate playing time were also a factor in his decision to choose Northwestern, but that is at least what we know. In total, he finished his prep career with 29 total touchdowns, was a state player of the year, and a hidden gem in his high school recruiting class. One scout said, quote, "He may be small, but he's fast and he's hard to tackle. He's also solid in coverage and has good ball skills, making him a Swiss Army knife." According to 24/7 Sports, Malik Washington was a 3-star recruit, the number 54 athlete, and the 837th best player in the class of 2018. So, how would Malik do at Northwestern? Well, let's take a look. When Malik Washington eventually arrived at Northwestern, he would redshirt his first year, before he would eventually play in 11 games, catching 6 passes for 25 yards during his first year in 2019. In 2020, during the shortened season, he would help Northwestern advance to the Big Ten Championship, catching 5 passes for 51 total yards. Through 3 years in Evanston, Washington had pretty much done nothing, but there also wasn't that much expected of him. Luckily, the next 2 years have proved to be pretty solid for him, as in 2021, he'd have his breakout season. He ended up catching 44 passes for 578 yards and 2 total touchdowns. He had a couple of big performances, including 5 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown against Rutgers, a touchdown against Indiana State, and 6 catches for 75 yards in a game against Iowa. Going into 2022, Washington was expected to have a much bigger year, and that is exactly what would happen. He'd go for nearly 100 yards in their win against Nebraska and Ireland, and then would catch 7 passes in a loss to Duke. He had a touchdown in their loss to SIU, and then had a career-high 8 catches in a loss to Miami of Ohio. From there, he'd be consistent, as he had 6 catches against Maryland, 6 catches against Ohio State, 6 catches against Minnesota, and 7 against Illinois. In total, he finished with 65 receptions for 694 yards and a touchdown. He was a third-team All-Big Ten selection, and would decide for his last year that he wanted to do something else. I don't know if this was because of the Pat Fitzgerald situation, but I do know I think that played a little bit of a part in it, and he would eventually find a new school. Turn across the country, Virginia, a school in the ACC, was faced with a major question mark. The wide receiver room was thin after they lost both Dontavian Wicks and Keaton Thompson to graduation in the NFL. Malik Washington said he wanted to be an instant contributor, and he decided to commit to the Wahoos. Malik Washington would end up having a historic season for Virginia, and head coach Tony Elliott was not surprised at all. He said, quote, "I did expect him to be a big contributor after watching him since he came in. He was very productive at Northwestern, so I expected him to come in and do the things that he's doing." So how good exactly was he? Well, let's take a look. Ultimately, Washington would have a very difficult start to his time at Virginia, as in week 1 they would play against Tennessee. He'd end up catching 4 passes for 29 yards, and things would get interesting as Tony Muskett really struggled. Luckily in week 2 though, he would have his first big game. In a 1-point loss to James Madison, he caught 5 passes for 119 yards in his first touchdown in a Virginia uniform. He started to go crazy. He had a career-high 9 catches for 141 yards against Maryland, and then had 10 catches for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns in a loss to NC State. Sadly, despite his stellar performances, Virginia got off to an 0-4 start. After his game against Maryland, that was his second career 100-yard game, and through those 3 games, he had more 100-yard receiving performances than the Cavs had the entire last season combined. He'd end up developing great chemistry with both quarterbacks Tony Muskett and Anthony Colandrea, and despite an 0-5 start, Washington was incredible. He was 4th in college football in receiving yards, 7th in receiving yards per game, 8th in receptions, 11th in receptions per game, and 20th in touchdown. Luckily from there, he would continue to get better and better. He had 9 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown against Boston College, had 7 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown against William & Mary, and then he actually went berserk. In a 3-game stretch against North Carolina, Miami, and Georgia Tech, he had a total of 35 catches for over 500 yards and a touchdown. Washington was absolutely dominating at the end of October and would continue on through the month of November, finishing off a historic season. He caught 9 passes for 155 yards and a touchdown against Louisville, 8 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns against Duke, and then 14 catches for 115 yards and a loss to Virginia Tech. Ultimately, Virginia had a pretty awful season as they ended up going 3-9. They did have 2 decent wins though, as they would beat Duke by 3 points, and then had that historic top 10 win on the road against North Carolina. In total, Washington would finish with 110 catches for 1,426 yards and 9 touchdowns. Honestly, it was pretty insane. In his final college game against Virginia Tech, he had those 14 catches, and that was second most all-time by a Cavalier in a single game, only behind Alvin Pierman, who had 16 against Florida State in 2003. During that game, he also became just the 6th receiver in ACC history to have 100 or more receptions in a season, and then proceeded to break the ACC's all-time single-season reception record, which was previously held by Jamison Crowder with 108 catches in 2013. In total, he was absolutely crazy, as his receiving yards was the 2nd most in FBS football and 5th most in ACC history. Tony Elliott said, quote, "For the guy to come in here as a transfer and is now an esteemed company, it's pretty special. It speaks to his durability, his availability, and the way he prepares." So without any extra year eligibility remaining, Malik Washington would enter the 2024 NFL draft pool. According to NFL Mock Database, he was a projected 3rd-round pick and a 94th best prospect. Some even thought he could be a 2nd-round player, but many were concerned about one thing: his height. Here's what the scouting report said, quote, "Washington is an elite route runner with a ridiculously good ability to adjust his body to make tough catches. He has great speed, great burst, and his ability to get yards after contact ranks near the top of his class. All in all, he's a fantastic playmaker who's put it together all in the field and can clearly play at a high level in the NFL. While many teams may be hesitant to take him because of his size, it is clear when you put on the tape that he's one of the best receivers in the entire draft class and is going to instantly make an offense better from day one." He also had 35 missed tackles forced, and that ranked the most amongst all receivers in 2023. Only Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors had more receptions on deep passes, and Malik Washington was truly the gem of the class. Somehow, someway, this stuff always seems to happen, and good players get screwed over. Malik Washington would fall all the way to round number 6, where he was eventually taken with the 184th overall selection by the Miami Dolphins. Many said, of course, as the Dolphins already have a stacked receiving room that includes Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Odell Beckham Jr. Malik will have an opportunity to learn from some of the best in the business, as he said, quote, "I have 3 guys ahead of me that know what they're doing. They've done it before, and they've had a lot of success at doing it, and I just want to be a sponge, take in all the information I can, and try to take it into my game as well." So yeah, Malik Washington will most definitely make the roster in my eyes, and he'll probably get himself to be that 4th option on the team eventually. I see him as a guy who could immediately be a threat for the Dolphins this year, and someone that could actually have good fantasy usage. He'll catch a lot of passes, he'll always get open, and I think he'll be a tough, durable player. It doesn't look like injuries have bothered him at all during his college career, and this guy is completely going under the radar. In my opinion, he was the best player selected in day 3 of the draft, and he's definitely going to hit. There wasn't a ton of information on his story and how he got to this point, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know what you think of Malik Washington, give me a rookie I can cover next, and before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about Ennis Rakestraw Jr. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.